welcome Jason to come talk to us about Azure CLI.
Thank you. Hello everyone, I'm Jason Taylor. I'm a Microsoft MVP in Developer Technologies and a solution architect for Increment. And Increment is a leading technical consultancy and Microsoft partner that specializes in delivering industry-leading solutions across the entire Microsoft ecosystem. It's awesome to be back here at the Brisbane.NET User Group. This is my favorite place to present. And tonight I'm going to show you the Azure Developer CLI. Is anyone currently using the Azure Developer CLI? Show of hands. We've got two people. Have you released to production?
Depends on if you say other people can access it as production.
Yeah.
Yes.
So not yet, but
It's
pretty much.
accessible by others, so that's then production.
Yeah. Okay. And yourself? Yeah. No problem. So this is one of my favorite topics. In fact, I think it was late last year I presented here, and it was clean architecture on .NET 8. And it was a walk through the clean architecture solution template. And I just upgraded the Azure DevOps, the DevOps in that. And I wanted to show you how I could go from file new project to production in 45 minutes, which is an amazing time frame to do it in. And that was really exciting, but I had to build a lot of scripts myself. I had to build a lot of the infrastructure as code myself, the pipelines, all of that sort of stuff. I didn't have something that I could fall back on, something that was proven to be best practices. And that's what the Azure Developer CLI is. It has all of these templates that you can go and look at, and they've been vetted by the Microsoft team. So the infrastructure is up to scratch, the pipelines are up to scratch. It provides you with a really good starting point so that you can be confident you'll get started on the right foot. And so my goal previously was file new project to production in 45 minutes. But with Azure Developer CLI, I can do that in 5 minutes. So it's pretty cool. And I don't have to write these scripts myself because that's what the Azure Developer CLI does. Let's learn a little bit more. So the Azure Developer CLI is an open source tool that accelerates the time it takes to get your app from local dev to Azure. Now, you probably heard of the Azure CLI, right? AZ. Azure Developer CLI is a little bit different because it includes a range of developer-friendly commands that map to key stages of your workflow. So there's AZD init, which initializes a new application in your current directory. Now this could be an empty directory where you're wanting to create, say, a new app with AZD, or it could be an application that you'd like to make AZD compatible. It also includes package, so you can package your application ready for deployment to Azure. Provision the Azure resources necessary to support your application. Deploy an application to Azure. And monitor. These are just a few of the commands that you'll get with AZD that map to the key stages of your workflow. So using AZD, you also, as I mentioned, gain access to templates designed to expedite your app development. So if you're wanting to build something new and you really don't have a strong background in DevOps, you don't know how to build infrastructure as code, you don't know how to build pipelines as code, this is where you can start. And this is where you can begin to learn on that journey. So you can go to aka.ms and we'll fire this up. Skip. It's over there. I think that's going to be good. You can come over here and find something that suits your requirements. Okay, so if you wanted to do something with React, then you can type in React, or you can use the filtering. We want to do React with .NET and maybe on SQL. So there's a couple of templates for React with a .NET backend and a SQL database. And so you can take a look at this then, and it'll give you an overview of that template. And if you want to get started, you can run this command to create this new React solution in an empty directory on your computer. And then you can run the next command, which they haven't shown here, AZD up. And that will package, provision, and deploy your application to Azure. So literally 2 commands to get a React web app with C# API and a SQL database into the cloud. And so you can then go in to this template and you can see, okay, here's the pipelines as code for, I'll zoom in on that too. Here's the pipelines as code for Azure DevOps. Here's the pipelines as code for GitHub Actions. Here's where my infrastructure has been defined using either Bicep or Terraform, depending on the choice you made. Here's the file that's used by Azure CLI to describe this solution and the services it contains. This solution probably contains a client front end and a server back end, each of them hosted independently on Azure. So you can start with an application in Azure and then start to learn about all of these DevOps things, because it takes a long time to get across all of this. So if I wanted to try that out tonight, we might as well. Let's fire up Windows Terminal, and I'll go to D drive, code, scratch, and we'll zoom in on this too. I think that should be good. Okay, so we'll make a directory React, and we'll go cd React, and I'll steal the code from here, and that's specifying the template to use. Okay, so azd init, the name of the template. But it's kind of interesting just to run azd init as well, and you can kind of see, well, I've got two options. I can use the code in the current directory, there is no code, or I can select a template, and then it will provide you with a list of templates as well. So you can, if you want to browse through the command line, you can. We're actually going to be pretty shortly having a look at this starter bicep template. But let's jump out of that and paste this one back in. And so now we're using this React template. So azd init to do C# SQL, that's the name of the template. And it's asking us for an environment name. So we're going to create a development environment. So I'm just going to call it React Dev. Now that environment name is also going to be used when the infrastructure is created as the resource group name. It'll be rg-react dev. So that's one command, right? azd init. And now if we want to push it up to Azure, we just run azd up. And as I said, that will package the application, so essentially a .NET build. It will provision the resources using Bicep, and then it will deploy the application based on that package. So I've just got a few options to select there, and that's all underway. So getting started with AZD is really easy. You just head over to aka.ms/awesomeazd and find a template that suits your requirements. And that'll generally include a skeleton project with some sample code, but all of the infrastructure and pipelines to get from code to cloud. So the other thing that you can do at aka.awesomeazd is you can get help. So you can find all of the documentation, whether it's getting started documentation or the official docs. You can also contribute. And the contribute section is interesting because you can contribute a new template if you would like to. There's a lot of opportunity for that. I've contributed one. And you can also welcome contributions of the requested templates. So people have requested templates out there. If you're not sure what to build, you can try building one of these. But you can also just raise a request and say, hey, I would like this template. It doesn't exist. I don't have the skills to build it, but I would like this template. And so then maybe someone else will come along and build it for you. And of course, we're very lucky in Australia. If you do find a bug and you submit it to the team, well, they work while we sleep. So you'll get that fixed overnight a lot of the time. I've had bugs fixed overnight, and I've had help requests responded to overnight, which is really, really cool. So that's the basics. But we're not here to do the basics tonight. We're going to do a deep dive. So we'll build an AZD template from scratch. We're going to build a Blazor on ASP.NET Core 8 application. For infrastructure, we'll have an app service, a SQL database, Key Vault, App Insights, and Portal Dashboard. And we will deploy and release using GitHub Actions and infrastructure as code using Bicep. And when it gets into the cloud, it's going to look a little bit like this. I don't have too many more slides after this, so we'll be diving in and just doing code demos. Any questions at this stage? Yes?
I want to clarify. We've got Damien Brady next month, right?
Yes.
Friends don't let friends right-click publish.
Mm-hmm.
This feels like that, but saying it's not, because we're actually creating everything proper.
Mm-hmm.
That's configurable then thereafter.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And that's right. So the question is, Damien Brady's presenting here next month. I think he's presenting on all things GitHub. So he's going to have lots of questions and answers, essentially.
Very prepared talk.
Yeah, which is some of the best talks. This one's very prepared. And so the question is, Damien Brady often says, friends don't let friends right-click publish, because right-click publish is a bit notorious. It skips best practices. Well, two things. With Visual Studio Code and the extension for AZD, you can right-click publish. But yeah, it's based on these best practices. So the built-in infrastructure as code, built-in pipelines as code. And if you're looking at one of those awesome AZD templates, also be embedded by the team to make sure that it's following best practices. So you can right-click publish in the right way. Yeah. No worries. Any other questions?
Have they updated the templates for Aspire yet?
I know that Aspires has their own AZD template. Yeah, I'm not sure. Yeah, good question. All right, so we're going to dive in. We're going to build our own template. So let me get this out of the way. And that's still deploying. So the first deploy for an application like that's probably going to take about 10 to 15 minutes, but that's okay. We don't need to hang around for that. So we do a lot of deployments in this talk, and so far I haven't had any failures. So tonight might be the night. I'll zoom that. Yeah, thank you.
No, we're not seeing your desktop.
Oh, really? Maybe that's some strangeness because I actually closed PowerPoint, but that's okay. Identify. Yeah, it's a different screen. Extend 1 and 3. 3, 2, 1. Yeah. No. There we go. And that's big enough. Okay. So where are we? We're in my Jason Taylor dev directory. We'll get out of that. Scratch. This is where I put all the stuff that I know I can safely delete. And I've got this AZD Blazor demo, and that's nice and empty, which is good, which is what I want it to be. So we're going to create a Blazor application on .NET 8. Okay, so we go .NET, new, Blazor, there we go. So you can see there we're going .NET new Blazor, so we're using the .NET CLI to create a Blazor application. We're specifying auth individual. That means that it's going to use ASP.NET Core for authentication and authorization. It's using local DB, which means it's using a version of SQL Server, and we're outputting it to the directory source/web. So if I press enter, it'll go and create that. Now we want to run it just to make sure it's running. This isn't really about building a Blazor app. So I'll jump into the web directory and we'll just go ahead and run .NET run, make sure that spins up, make sure that we can see the app, and then we'll close it down again and start making this AZD compatible. There we go, it's looking good. Everything we expect to have with our ASP.NET Core applications. We've got our home page, counter, and our weather forecast. It ticks all the boxes. I'll close this one down, just make sure it's out of the way. Okay, kill that, and pop D. Now I want to commit that, right? Because we're going to start using AZD. We'll use AZD init to bring in some things, and I want to see those things by comparing, by looking at the git changes. So we'll go .NET new git ignore. We'll get our normal git ignore file from the .NET CLI, git init, git add, and git commit. With the right emoji. And this one's ta-da, because that's it. Everyone knows about Gitmoji, right? I ask this every time. Does anyone not know about Gitmoji? Well, we'll just stop right there. So we go to Gitmoji. I never remember it. This is how I do it every day. Gitmoji, and you have emojis which relate to the type of commit that you're making. So you prefix your commit with an emoji. So if you had a bug, you can prefix it with bug. And then instead of saying this is a bug fix for blah, 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 you can just do bug emoji. And you can go fixes #896 or fixes whatever. You don't have to say that it's a bug. And if it's a new feature, then you use stars. Stars. Oh, that's right, I have to type feature. Sparkles. Okay, for a new feature. If we're doing some infrastructure, come on, there it is, bricks. And if you had a few beers that night, then you use beers and you write code drunkenly. So lots of great stuff in there. I think it looks really nice to see the commit history with the emojis, and it's also meaningful. So you can quickly see that something's a bug or a new feature, that sort of thing. That's cool.
Conventional commits.
Yep.
So the beer emoji means you've got to really pay attention to the code review on that
Mm-hmm.
commit, right?
Yep. Yep.
Could you
I've used it.
crazy code in there?
I've used it a few times, just for my stuff. You'll find it. It's out there. All right. So we committed that. So we got a clean working tree. Good. And so now we'll go azd init. And so there's two options as before. Use code in the current directory, which is easy init, azd easy init, and it'll scan the code, try to figure everything out, and build azd compatibility for you. That's too easy, so we're going to select a template. So we're going to say, and you can do this on your existing solutions, right, if you want to make it azd compatible. We want to say continue initializing an app in this directory, yes. And it'll say, here are all the templates. And we could have specified the template name, but this one's pretty close to the top. Did I go past it already? I did go pretty fast. Yeah, I went past it. React. There's that Blazor one. That's mine. Okay, I'm just gonna kill that, and then we'll go again. Select a template. Yes, and now we're going to do it a little bit slower. There it is, right at the start. So we're choosing the starter bicep template, and it has everything that we need to get started and run the app on Azure. So it says you've already got a git ignore. Do you want to overwrite with versions from the template? And I do not want to overwrite with versions from the template, so I say keep my existing files unchanged. And unless they fixed it, it's going to overwrite. But we've got git enabled, so we can see the changes that it makes. And now I'm going to choose the environment name. It's going to be web dev. Now, one of the things I can do is I can say azd env list, and I can see all of the environments, and I can select environments, and I can create new environments. So you can manage a lot of these things from the command line. But what I'd like to do first is jump into VS Code and have a look at what just happened when we ran azd init. So I added 49 new files to our solution, and those files were created in the directories that I showed you before with the React template. So I'm going to zoom this in, and we'll have a good look. So we've got azdo, so that's our pipelines as code for Azure DevOps. And so it has a skeleton pipeline that you can look at to get started with. And it'll use azd. You can see that it's installing azd, and it will authenticate using azd, then it will provision. And where is it? I went past provision and deploy, okay, the application. And so it's going to create the infrastructure to support the application and then deploy the actual application itself. So this is how you can get started. And if we go to GitHub, then we've got a GitHub Actions pipeline to help you get started, which does the same thing. It's just for GitHub Actions. All right, so those are our pipelines. We also have dev containers. So if you'd like a cloud-based development environment using code spaces, we've got the basics there to get us started. We probably want to go and configure that further, as we will with most of this stuff. We've got our infra folder, which contains our main.bicep, so that's our entry point for our infrastructure as code. But this, which is really cool, this core folder contains a whole bunch of reusable bicep modules. And Terraform template's the same. So you don't have to write all this stuff from scratch from the documentation. You can actually come in here and look in the category that you're interested in and actually use one of these modules. So we'll be using a app service. And so if I come into this app service module, you can see there's a whole bunch of parameters that I can supply. And there's also a whole bunch of smarts built into this. And I'll try not to skip over them. So one of them that I really like is, an app service can have a managed identity. Well, if you provide a key vault name, it'll switch that on for you. Okay? So just the fact that you provided a key vault name, and looking down here, you know, managing connection strings and stuff like that can be a bit annoying. So if you provide an application insights name, it'll add the app service configuration to support application insights. And if you supply key vault, it'll add the configuration to support that. So this is stuff that is now in my project. So I can change this module if I want to. I can extend this module with my own code or another module, and I can use it. But it really helps me hit the ground running, right? I've got a lot, and this is just one. There's so many in there. So I really like that. There's also some abbreviations which it uses. So you don't have to think about, you still need to think about your naming conventions for your solution in the cloud, but these are a really great place to start. And so I'd stick with these. I always like to stick with, if someone can supply me a set of rules that's automated by code, or conventions that are based on some Git repo that I can go and refresh later, I'll always stick with that, because that means I have to think less about it. And then if the team wants to change something, then we do it as a team, right? We make that decision together, and that's fine, and we have this file to go and change the conventions. So we'll use that. Yeah?
Is that based on like a Azure naming conventions document somewhere, I imagine?
I think so, yeah. I haven't specifically checked it against their recommended naming resources. I just assume that it is. Yeah. And the fact that they've put it in code and I don't have to read it on Microsoft Learn, I'm just running with it. Much better. All right, here's our main.bicep file. We're going to use this soon to define the infrastructure that we'll need to host our service. One of the things that you'll see pretty quickly is that our service will have some funny names, and that's because it's generating this random resource token so that we don't have any clashes naming, say, our app service and that sort of thing. So that's something that I won't change tonight, but typically you'd want to change. You'd probably delete this resource token and give it a project name once you've checked that the names that you'd like to use for your resources are available. So the other thing that we have here is, where'd it go? Azure.yaml. And this is the file that describes our application setup, or more specifically our solution setup. And it tells it in this solution, which is called AZD Starter at the moment, we've got a number of services, and these services will be written in a number of different languages. You find the source code in this location, and we'll host it in an app service. So you can have more than one service that this application can deploy. And when you're using the tools, you can choose to deploy all of the services at once, or you can deploy an individual service. So we'll get into that. So that's what the Bicep Starter template has brought in for us to get us started. So we'll go and commit that. There we go. And now we will go and update the azure.yaml file to tell it all about our Blazor web app. So if I come into, I'm going to zoom out a little bit, that's pretty big. There we go. So I'm just going to drop this one, and here it is. So we have our AZD Blazor demo solution. It has a single service, which I have creatively named Web. The language is C#. You can see some other options there include F#, Python, Java. It's going to be finding the source code here, and it will be hosted on an app service. And you can see some other options there, such as function, container app, or static web app. So that tells that tells AZD where to find our services, in this case web, and how it might go about packaging it. So now from the command line, I can run azd package, and I'll output it to this dist path. I'm not actually going to use this package because I don't need it in this case, but I do want to test that AZD can find my application and can build it, because that's something that it will be doing. For example, if I run AZD deploy, the first thing it will do is package the application. Okay, so I want to make sure that's right. So that's good. Now, in order to provision the infrastructure, we need to go and update main, because while it's got a lot of helpful bicep modules, it doesn't actually do anything yet. Maybe it creates a resource group. Yeah, so it'll create a resource group, but it'll be empty. So we'll start by creating a new folder called app. And then inside of that, I'm going to create a bicep module called web, which matches the name of my service. And I'll pop that in there. We'll have a look at it. So it has some parameters. I can pass through various things like the location, the tags, the web service name, app service name, and so on. And then it's going to use this monitoring module to set up a log analytics workspace, application insights, and a dashboard for monitoring our application, which is really cool, right? That's just one module that we're passing a few parameters to. So we can dive in and look at the details of that, but I won't. Then we're going to set up our app service plan, so a B1 on Linux. Then we're going to set up our app service. And here I'm specifying some additional tags. I'm specifying the service name web, right? Because when AZD deploys this, it's going to check, whenever it deploys, it's going to check this service. And it uses the tag to do that. We've got our app insights name. We've got our key vault name, so we know that that means it's going to have a managed identity. It's going to add the configuration for application insights and key vault, and it's going to be running on .NET 8. I've got some outputs here so that I can use those in whatever way I need. So I still need to, I've created that module, but I still need to call it, right, for it to do all of those things. So we can see we've got a comment here, add resources to be provisioned below. We'll start with this web service. And you can see we're just calling the module and passing through essentially names of all the things that we want to create. And this is where it's using that resource token, right? We could change that with project name so that we don't get this sort of thing, randomly named resources. But of course, it's good for demo purposes because they're not going to conflict with anything else that needs to be hosted. So I'm missing a couple of things. I need the web service name, and they've got an example up here, and it's kind of the name of the services or the service defined in Azure.yaml. So I'm just going to delete all of those comments, and I'll create my web service name variable, web, and web. That one's an easy one. And then I need my key vault. But I'm missing a few other things as well. I need SQL Server, Key Vault, and I need to give my app service access to the Key Vault. So I've got some additional resources here. Okay, so we have Key Vault, and we're passing in a principal ID. And this principal ID is actually the identity. If I'm running locally, it's the identity of me authenticated to Azure. If I'm running in a pipeline, it's whatever identity that pipeline is running under, which we'll set up later. And with that identity, it's going to add get and list to secrets. So if that's something you want, great. If that's something you don't want, you can change it. So that's just a nice to have, right? As a developer, if I deploy to the development environment, I now have immediate access to the secrets in Azure Key Vault for get and list. You might not always want that. So that's what these modules are for. They're here to help you, but you can, of course, change them to suit your requirements. Down here, we've got SQL Server. We're going to create a SQL admin user. That's for us. And a SQL app user. That's for the application. And we'll be passing in passwords, a password and, two passwords, the admin password and the user password. And then, of course, we're going to give our app service with its new managed identity access to that Key Vault. Okay? And it'll be using this Key Vault access module to do that. So we can dive in and look at the details, but I won't. So where do we get the principal ID, the SQL admin password, and the app user password? Well, first we need to define some parameters, and we'll pass them in from main.parameters.bicep. So let's see. So these are the parameters. Okay, principal ID, SQL admin password, app user password. Back over here, main.parameters.json, I should say. And then pass this in. So the principal ID is actually going to come from the AZD environment variables. So AZD maintains some environment variables. One of those is Azure Principal ID, which is the authenticated user. Then we have this cool function from AZD. It's called secret or random password. And what it will do is it will check Key Vault to see if that secret already exists. And if it does, it will use the secret in Key Vault. If Key Vault doesn't exist, or that value doesn't, or that secret doesn't exist, then it will generate a new random password. So you have a nice little helper function here that you don't have to write yourself, and you also have control about when that secret's going to be regenerated. So we have principal ID, SQL admin password, and app user password. And that's pretty much it. That's enough for us to get this application provisioned. So if I go git add dot git commit and some bricks. Where are my bricks? There they are. Okay, now I can go AZD provision. Almost caught myself up. That would be the first demo failure. Okay, so the environment name needs to change. We're going to change it to AZD environment. I think it's new. Yeah, new. What do I want to call it? AZD Blazor demo. There we go. So if I go AZD environment list, I've got two now, but the one that I've just created is the one that's selected. So when I run commands like deploy, that's the environment it's going to use. Okay, so we want to provision our resources to Azure. We want to get all of that infrastructure set up so that we could deploy the application. Now I could just do both things at once. I could run AZD up, that will provision and deploy our application. But we're just getting started. We're just building this template. So let's do it one step at a time so that if provision fails, well, we're just dealing with a provision failure and we can figure that out. Okay, so this is going to take about 10 to 15 minutes. Right, so we're not going to wait around for it, but I'll get through the prompts. So you can see I selected my subscription. I selected the location, Australia East. It's going to go and compare the deployment state. Web dev does have something deployed. That's the second part of my demo. That's the part that I baked earlier. So that's why I had to change that resource group name so that we got a fresh deploy for this example. While we're waiting for that, this is the React app that we deployed, right? So there's the API and there's the web front end. So let's go to that. There it is. Right, 2 commands to get to that point. Pretty cool. I think I'm going to assume that it'll finish in a second, but we'll have a look at this one. Okay, so you can see the resources are now starting to provision. We've got our resource group, AZD Blazor demo, and it's done Key Vault, app service plan, and all that sort of thing. Okay, just check. I'm going to control F5 that. I'm not going to spend any time troubleshooting that because I didn't write this code, so it's not my responsibility. All right. So when I presented this for the first time, JK, my mate, was there, and he said, hey, you know, you set up Key Vault and you set up App Insights, but is it actually going to work? Because I didn't see you do anything in that application. No, it didn't work. It was just smoke and mirrors. So let's go and update the application so that it does work. So we'll start with, while we're waiting, we'll start with Key Vault. So first we need to install the package. If I can get, there it is. So jumping into source, this is so easy to get set up to, so at least then it's completely working. We'll install the azure.extensions.spnetcore.configuration.secrets package. And then we'll just hide that. And then we'll go over to our source web program.cs. And remember to register Key Vault right at the top. so that it can find the secrets when it needs them. And so here, it's going to be checking to see if there's some configuration. Azure Key Vault endpoint, right? And that's exactly what's happening when we deploy that application. It's setting up that configuration for the app service. So if it finds that configuration, it'll go and wire up Key Vault using that endpoint. So that's nice and simple. And if we go now for App Insights, if I can get the terminal back, there we go. And we'll install microsoft.appinsights.ASP.NET Core and configure App Insights. And we'll just pop that in here. So this is just going to use the default configuration, so it'll find the App Insights connection string, which is in the app service for us. Okay, so we want to commit those changes. Let's see if that deployment's, it's coming along pretty nicely. We probably won't beat it, but that's okay. So I'm going to drop back, and we'll go git add dot git commit and sparkles. There we go. Add App Insights and Key Vault. Good. So the next thing that we'd want to do is deploy our application. So we're getting a little bit ahead of where this one's at now. So what I'll do is I'll close that and we'll jump over to the one that I prepared earlier, which is in here. So it's the exact same application. The only difference is provision is finished and deploy has finished, okay? And so we can do some cool things here now. AZD, so we would run AZD deploy, right? What's that? Thank you, I appreciate that. So we could run AZD deploy and redeploy that application if we'd made some changes to the code. We could change the infrastructure and run AZD provision again. We can run these things as many times as we want. And if we're feeling a bit cowboy and we made changes to the infrastructure and the code and we just want to deploy it all again, we can run AZD up. And if we want to tear that environment down, because maybe it's a sandbox, we can run AZD down. And if we're feeling really brave, we can force that and then purge all of the key vaults. Maybe don't do that on a Friday. Let's see. That one's ticking along.
Templates when you run that and it
Yeah.
say an app service.
Yes.
If the app service already exists, it doesn't deploy, it just goes to the next step.
That's right. Yeah.
So it does it.
Yep. So if I go AZD deploy, you know what? We'll do it differently. We'll run AZD provision preview. That way I don't mess anything up just in case I find a bug. I don't think there is one in this case. I've done this so many times, but it'll go in now and have a look at that environment and see the state and see if there's any changes to be made. And there shouldn't be any if I've done my job right. Provision does take a little while, but not as long as the actual initial provision. There we go. Oh, it looks like there is some modifications there. Now, I don't know whether that's a real modification or not. I'd have to have a little bit of a closer look, I think, to see that, because I didn't make any changes to the infrastructure. So it could be something that I could actually report to the AZD team, possibly. So there's some other cool stuff here. AZD environment get values. So these are some of those environment variables that we were working with. These are AZD environment variables. And so you can see the environment name. And there's a new one as well. Let me see if I can find it. I like this one. Where was it? AZD environment, get values, list, new.
There's the new one. It says new.
New, yeah, new environment. There was something else, but now I can't remember what it was.
Not even in the docs yet.
Yeah, I did read it in one of the release notes. You know what we could do? We go AZD environment, docs, and we jump over to the docs and see if it's in there. Deploy. What's that? Oh no, this is up to date. Yeah, I mean as of this afternoon. Where'd it go? AZD. Control find AZD. Environment. Manage environments. Docs help. Get values, list, new, refresh, select, set. Nah. That's all right. I can't remember, and it's not in the docs, so yeah, we'll give that one a miss. So essentially, we've deployed to Azure, and if we wanted to now, we could run AZD monitor and bring up that App Insights dashboard that we created by using that monitor bicep module. So this is our dashboard for this particular environment for the application that we just deployed, right? We didn't have to do this, and we can get to it really quickly, which is great. And if you have a look at AZD monitor, it's got some options there. So if we want to jump straight to the logs, we can go logs. If we want to go to live metrics, we can go live. Or the default, just go to the dashboard, straight from the command line. Really nice. All right, let's see. I think that's it for that demo. I think now what I'd like to do is move on to configuring the DevOps pipeline. But are there any questions before we do? Yeah.
Why Bicep rather than Terraform?
Because I know Bicep well, and I don't know Terraform well, and I'm terrified that something will fail. No, it's something I still have to learn a little bit more. So yeah, good question. Yes?
I find it somewhat disconcerting or strange, just making sure I understand this correctly.
Yeah.
Like some of the AZD commands
Yeah.
like modify files locally and help you to set up the project.
Yeah.
And some of the commands are like deployment provisioning related that like is kind of the bad stuff like right click deploy that you wouldn't normally do. And then some of the commands like monitor is essentially just open a web browser pointing at something. Is that, am I understanding that correctly? That like there's
Yeah.
or maybe even more modes of them doing things?
Yeah.
I rather than thinking of it as right-click deploy that deploys everything, it's right-click deploying the pipelines and then running the pipelines.
But that's not.
Yeah.
That's
No.
not deploying a pipeline. That's running Bicep.
That's right, which is an amazing opportunity to have if you're a developer and you have, a full built-out pipeline, but you just want to deploy a sandbox there because you just wrote some code drunkenly and now you want to test it separately where it's not going to affect anything, right? So you can spin up your sandbox using AZD environment new and then AZD up. And then you can tear that down when you finish with AZD down. But you can also have those pipelines.
Presumably your pipeline's then going to use AZD to do the same thing. Right?
Yeah, that's right. So I'm not going to cover it tonight because it takes about an hour and 45 minutes. Some of you have seen it. But yeah, I do have some content on extending the pipeline to support multiple stages. And it uses AZD to package the application, to upload that as an artifact, and then to move that artifact through the multiple stages with stage gates and whatever else you want. So yeah.
I understand that. There's a crossing of concerns from the one product.
Yeah.
It's nicely spaced out in that commands thing there, but yeah, you want to make sure you're in the right environment when you type deploy.
Definitely. And you want to make sure you're in the right environment when you type AZD down force purge, right? it's a,
You need to make sure you don't register production as an environment here, right?
Yeah.
So you can't do it like
yeah. Well,
the CI tool or CD tool would know about production. You wouldn't know about production.
a couple of things. So,
Yeah, that too, right?
right. So a couple of things. So you can create and share environments using remote environments. So they're not local, but AZD environment lists can still see them. And that means a developer can go AZD environment select prod, and they can go AZD monitor, and go AZD monitor logs. And that's really useful, right? But we also need to make sure that developers who shouldn't have permission to change infrastructure in production don't have permission to change infrastructure in production, right? The pipeline does that. So this isn't going to bypass your permission so that you can run AZD down force purge. That's not going to happen unless, yeah, you have that access. So, and if you do, be careful. But no, we shouldn't have that level of access. We should need to elevate our permissions in order to be able to do something like that, which would really be terrifying.
I'm assuming that's why they give you those Git workflows folders and the pipelines folders, so you can deploy those to your CID environment.
Exactly, yeah. So we're going to set that up now. That's the next thing we'll do. So we'll set up a pipeline for this, just to start a pipeline, with GitHub Actions? All right, good question. Let's check on this. I'm sure yeah, there we go. We only have resources, right? So we can go and check out the resources. But I can run deploy, azd deploy. There we go. So it's publishing, so it's packaging, and then it's going to zip it up, and then it's going to push it up, and it won't take that long. It'll probably take a minute or two. But there's all of our resources. Zoom in. Yeah. With their beautiful names. We're not going to dive into that. All right, so that's underway. This is the app that we're working on now, and we're going to build out the pipeline. I want to build a pipeline with GitHub Actions, so we need a GitHub repo. So let's use the GitHub CLI to do that. So we'll go GitHub repo create, and this one's going to be called source dot. So it's going to be called AZD Blazor demo, and we're going to make it a public repo, and we're going to push all of the stuff to it straight away. Okay, so created the repo, added the remote, pushing all the stuff up. It's done. Now we can go GitHub browse, and that'll fire that up. And there's our new repo with all our code committed. It's going to try and kick off the action, right? Because there is one. It's in the GitHub folder, but it'll fail pretty quickly because it doesn't have the variables for the secrets for credentials. So it'll get to here and fail. So we'll look at that next. So what we want to do now is AZD pipeline config. And I think I'll just bring up help on that. So you can see there's a few different options. I might zoom out. So we can specify auth type, and we'll be using federated for GitHub Actions. We can specify the environment if we want. We can specify the environment for most of the commands, but if you've selected the correct environment, you don't need to. And we can specify the principal ID and the principal name. So this is the service principal that will be used as the identity of the GitHub Actions workflow, right? To deploy, it'll be the one that's authorized to deploy these resources to Azure. And we're going to give it a name because if we don't, I think the name will be AZD-2024-0307-1856, which is not a really good service principal name. So this is one of my best tips, is give it a principal name. So let's go and do that. So AZD, and this is something that really took quite a bit of setting up when you're doing it from scratch, when you're writing your own scripts. And it's quite easy to do now, and it's supported for GitHub Actions and AZD. No, GitHub Actions and Azure DevOps, AZDO. That's similar. So we'll go config, auth type, federated, principal name will be, we're at .NET Brisbane. Yeah, sorry, thank you. There we go. So AZD pipeline config, auth type, federated, principal name, sp-.NET Brisbane. So that's going to do quite a few things for us that we don't have to do. So it's configuring the GitHub pipeline. So it's going to go and create some variables in the GitHub Actions pipeline, such as there they are, the Azure Client ID, which is the service principal ID, which it just created, the environment name, the location, the subscription ID, and the tenant ID. We can go and see all of those right now because they just got created. This is still running. That's strange. I don't want to go to settings. Hang on, let me check what's going on here. I had to sign in. I have a little cheat sheet that I run before these. No, not that one. I have a little cheat sheet that I run before these talks that I didn't follow today. So give me a second, I'll sign in. Super polished, super polished. I could show you the cheat sheet. Yeah, that's right. Trail. Let's see. this one. Here we go. Password 123 exclamation mark. All right, authentication code. I have to go this way and get my phone now. All right, auth. How much time do I have? 23 seconds. 7:04. Okay. Yeah, feel free. Okay, we're in. Settings. You can't see that. Now you can. Zooming in. If we go down to actions, general, zooming out. That's not where I want to be. Secrets and variables, actions, variables. There we go. So those are all the variables that were created when we ran AZD pipeline config. And over in Azure portal, it also created the service principal. If we have a look, I'm zoomed in too far. There we go. So app registrations. Here it is. It disappeared. So this service principal exists, and it has some federated credentials to authenticate GitHub Actions pipeline. So it's got one for pull requests and one for the main branch set up by default. So this is things that we don't have to do anymore. We can use AZD pipeline config for that. Yeah?
Are you able to pass in config to tell it to use environments so that you can have a different service principal for, say, staging compared to dev or to production?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yes, of course. Are you able to pass in config so you can tell it to use a different service principal for staging as compared to production? That's the question. And the answer is yes. You can specify the service principal ID to use. And you have some configuration options for how that service principal is created if you're creating one from scratch. So.
That config was put in your repository variables and not like environment.
Oh, I see. Yes. So in this, where is it? Over here. So the variables that were put in the GitHub repository are repository level variables rather than the environment variables. And if we wanted to set up a multi-stage pipeline, we would have different variables per environment. And that's something that AZD doesn't yet support in terms of AZD pipeline config, but it is something they're working on. And so if you want to learn more about how to do that with AZD, I can show you how to do that. You just need to reach out to me and I'll share some resources for you. So I've documented the process and I have an example application so that you can get that up and running. I've also sent that through to the AZD team, so I'm really hopeful that there'll be a solution for that soon. All right, but in actual fact, it's not that hard and it does work well because really we're not talking about something like AZD doesn't run CI/CD, okay? It's just helping us get it set up. And once that's done, we're just pushing changes through like normal and CI/CD is ticking over like normal. AZD is almost out of the picture for that part. All right. So what do? We've got our service principal set up. GitHub Actions should be able to connect to it now. We should be able to kick it off. We created a good service principal name, so it wasn't a very random one based on the date and time. We had a look at that. Yeah, okay. So all we really need to do is just run this again because it failed, because it couldn't provision the infrastructure because it didn't have access. So if we go rerun failed jobs, that should work. Question?
Why
Azure DevOps. I don't know. Personally, I use GitHub for all of my personal projects. So sorry. The question was why GitHub Actions versus Azure DevOps. So I just use GitHub for all of my personal projects, and I have some credits there, so that's useful to me. And I just really like working within the GitHub ecosystem. For work, I use Azure DevOps, and I use AZD with Azure DevOps. So yeah, it's just a personal choice.
Is there anything better than tighter integration, or is it roughly much of a muchness?
Much of a muchness, because once you've got the pipelines configured, it's really just down to the pipelines as code that you're creating anyway. So, but let's dive into that just a touch. So if we go into code again, just to see that pipeline once more, GitHub, Azure, this is the GitHub Actions one. So the key points are checking out the code, installing AZD. So it's going to use AZD in the pipeline, and it's going to use AZD to log in, either via a client ID or credentials. We're actually using federated credentials, so it's not, that was a silly way to say it, either via federated credentials or client credentials. And we're using federated credentials, so it's going to choose this option. Now, of course, we're getting our project set up. We're going to go in and delete all this, right? We don't need this part. We'll get rid of that if statement. It'll just always log in that way. So we start building on this. And then it's going to provision the infrastructure. But we wouldn't, if this was a multi-stage pipeline, that wouldn't be the first thing we'd do. I mean, aside from build and test and all of that, the next thing we'd do is package. So we'd package using AZD, and then we'd create a artifact for the pipeline, and that'd be the end of our build process once that artifact has been uploaded. But then once we get into the deployment, then we'll look at checking out our code and then provisioning using AZD provision. And if we're creating some kind of stage gate, we might even do an AZD provision preview and force someone to look at that. And then we might do provision once that stage gate is acceptable. And then we've got AZD deploy after that, so to go and actually deploy the environment. So we can set up this pipeline however we want. This is just for us to get started.
So with the infrastructure setting up this demo project, if you were to have two projects have a separate web API, etc.,
Yeah.
would you have two AZD projects, like the infra in each project, or would you have one that just does everything?
Yeah, I don't think I've established the question was, if we were building, say, the React application, where it had a React front end and an API back end, would you have two AZD projects, one to manage the front end concerns and one to manage the back end concerns? In the example that we saw earlier, it was one AZD project, and we can go in and have a look at that project. So if I come over to here and go code dot, one AZD project with multiple services listed, okay? So here's our front end, zooming in, and here's our back end. And so that'd be my first choice. Typically, if I'm building a solution, whether it's Angular, React, or Vue, I have them in the same solution. And that's simpler for me in the way that I like to work. And so AZD would have multiple services. But if that became painful, then I'd look for different options. And there's no reason why you can't do that. If you wanted a separate CI/CD pipeline and separate infrastructure and all of that for your front end and your back end, you can do that. Question?
Slightly more of a comment. I guess it depends on what kind of API it is too. Is it an API for your front end web app, or is it a standalone API that your front end web app just happens to be using? Right?
Yeah.
So philosophically, I guess, or structurally, you might
That's right.
choose one or the other.
Yeah.
Obviously, the combined one is simpler if that's where you want to
Yeah.
start. But if it's API first, you might start with a split, I guess.
Yeah, that's right. So it depends on what you're actually deploying. If it's a back end that always goes with the front end, so a traditional SPA application with a back end for the front end, then generally, yeah, you keep them together and deploy them together. And the benefit there is that, of course, you can deploy those things as a single unit Like when you run AZD deploy, it will deploy all the services by default, unless you specify otherwise. But if those two applications were generally maybe independently deployable, worked on by different teams, then you might like to have two AZD projects for that.
I was thinking, because I've got one infrastructure solution I use for setting up an AKS cluster
Yes,
and all the related things about it,
yes.
and then one for my container apps.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and keeping it separate is useful. One thing that I really like about AZD and this whole new world of an AI pair programmer is that there's pipelines as code and this infrastructure as code, and even that Azure.yaml file and even the reusable bicep modules, that's providing more and more context to our AI pair programmer. So now it understands about the infrastructure, it understands about the pipeline, it sees that there's some bicep or some Terraform modules that we can use. And so when we start asking questions, it has a lot more information. So that's pretty cool. And that's one of the reasons I think not to split things out until it's absolutely necessary.
Slightly unrelated question, but are you seeing a lot of people using Terraform with Azure? Is that a common use case, or are people just going for
Just
in the old days it was ARM and now it's probably Bicep?
in general, yeah, I think there's a lot of people using Terraform with Azure. Gordon probably could answer that question better.
Yeah, I think when you're touching lots of different providers, that's probably where Terraform becomes
That would be enough for the general reason to Terraform over.
Yeah, like I've got an example where Cloudflare is in front of it, and like one Terraform script fetches the origin cert from Cloudflare, sets up all the DNS in Cloudflare, sets up the service principal and the GitHub variables, and that's all done from inside of Terraform template. If everything's just in Azure, then there's little benefit of switching them.
All right, so we can see that our pipeline was successful. It has deployed the application, and our application is up and running, and we can access our counter. Sure, we can. Single page application, I shouldn't have to do that. Give it a second. It's really not important, but I'm just wondering why. We'll come back to that. So let's see. So we've got the basics of our CI/CD pipeline set up. If you want to go multi-stage, just reach out to me, okay? And I'll help you with that. Next thing we want to do, and this is the final demonstration for tonight, is actually take what we've built and turn it into an AZD template, right? And so to have an AZD template, we essentially need a project that follows AZD conventions. It's organized in a certain way so that it knows where to find the infrastructure, it knows where to find the pipelines, dev containers, has the Azure.yaml, that sort of stuff. We've done that. That's exactly what we did tonight. So we have a template that we can use. So let me show you. And we'll come back to that. I'm sure it's fine. It's fine. It's no problem. We'll access the counter. You'll see. All right. So we need a new directory. So let's I'll just drop back. Actually, this one. cd ... Yeah, we're in Scratch. So we'll go Brisbane.net. And I'll zoom that in a bit. Okay. Jumped into that directory? No. Brisbane.net. So .net. So don't count those commands, right? We haven't done any commands yet. We just created a new directory. So AZD and .net. We're going to specify the template, and it's going to be this one. Jason Taylor dev, my GitHub organization, and the template, the code that we've just been working on, that we've been pushing to, that's actually just deployed. So this is now our template. We press enter. And it's doing some pretty cool things here. So it's going to download the template, get everything set up for us, ask us for an environment name, which we'll call Brisbane.net dev, and it's ready to go. So now I want to go straight into pipeline config this time. So let's get a pipeline up and running. AZD pipeline config, looking at my cheat sheet, all type SP. Is that what I just, Did I call that? Oh, okay. That's fine. I got it around the wrong way anyway. Brisbane.net. There we go. So that's our principal. And so now it's going to do something pretty interesting. It's going to create the service principal, create the GitHub repo, kind of get the pipeline up and running, get the GitHub repository up and running. We'll go private because I don't have an option for anything else. And kick off the initial deployment. So now we're using 2 commands to go from code to cloud plus GitHub repo plus CI/CD pipeline and all of the configuration done. So that's pretty cool. This template? Yeah, that's the one we created. Yeah. So there's obviously where did it get the template from? The GitHub repo we created tonight. And that's just because we have a template, or we have a source code repository that follows the conventions of AZD. If the folders and files weren't named correctly, it wouldn't be a valid template, but we did a good job. And of course, we know from aka.ms and awesome AZD, we could come here and now we could submit this template. We could create a pull request for this template and get it added to the library. So that's exactly what I did. So there's a Blazor template in here somewhere. Scrolling down. This one. So there's my template available on awesome AZD. And it's really cool. Like, you can submit your own template. They'll give it a check. They'll make some suggestions, make sure that it aligns with best practices, and then they'll list it. So if you're learning, that can be a free code review for your template that you've just built, right? And then a contribution to the community. And as I said, if you're not sure what to build, then just look at the templates that have been requested, and you can get that up and running. So there we go. We're going to commit and push. Yep. And this is our Brisbane.net repo. And it's done, and it's all underway. And it's going. It should be going to the cloud as we speak. So I'm clicking on that, and then over here, it's just not doing anything. Oh yeah, there we go. Counter. We can count again. This is behaving very strangely. There we go. And we can see our weather. Good stuff. All right, so I think that's pretty much it. Let's bring back here. Skip through those. Now it's quiz time, because last time I ran, or actually the time before last that I ran this presentation, it was in a classroom, so we had a pop quiz. So now you guys get the pop quiz. So I hope you're paying attention. So using AZD, if we want to get started, we want to initialize a new application in the current directory. What is the command we run? Todd. AZD init. It's easy, right? AZD init. And here's some tips. You can run AZD template list to see a list of templates from the command line if you like. And you can run AZD init and name the template, so you don't have to scroll through that list. And you can run AZD auth login beforehand. So if you don't, it'll tell you anyway. AZD up to package, provision, and deploy an application, and AZD down to tear that back down. They have in the documentation, it'll remove the deployed application and the Azure resources, but it won't remove your source code. I don't think I was ever worried about it removing my source code, but there you go. All right, next, how do we package application code to be deployed to Azure? That's right, AZD package, right? Is the simple names. So you can specify the service that you'd like to package if you want, and the output path, so you can package your services individually. Yeah, little tip. Next, if we want to provision resources with AZD. AZD provision, right. You're doing a really good job. In a classroom, lots of people were getting these wrong. I don't know why. Classroom environment, they reverted to their former states. AZD provision preview, just to get a preview of changes. Deploying an application to Azure. AZD deploy. So we can deploy a specific service from a package right? So if we're building a multi-stage pipeline, that's what we're going to do. We'll download that package as an artifact and deploy it specifically. Because otherwise, AZD deploy will try to package first, okay, every time. Monitor a deployed application, AZD monitor. Some tips, AZD monitor overview, that'll bring up your default dashboard. And remember, you can go AZD environment select before you run this, so you can access the dashboards of different environments. You run AZD monitor live to see your live metrics, and AZD monitor logs to see the application insights logs. All right, this one's a tricky one. How do you configure your deployment pipeline to connect securely to Azure? It's not that tricky. So close. AZD pipeline config. All right, and remember to name your service principals, because otherwise it's going to be AZD and a bunch of numbers, so always do that. And you can choose your provider. By default, it's GitHub. You can also choose AZDO, and they both work quite well. And I should mention, you know, just because we only see the options GitHub and AZDO doesn't mean you can't use something else. You're just not going to get help with pipeline configuration, right? You can still use AZD in different pipelines. You install it and you use it. It's just the pipeline configuration aspect that we're talking about. All right, I've got some resources for you. So there's the AZD project, the docs, the templates, but really you just need this one, right? Awesome AZD. This links to everything else. So if you remember aka.ms/awesomeazd, you can find everything that you need. If you'd like to contribute to the template that I've built, AZD Blazor, you can find that on github.com/jasontaylordev/AZD Blazor. I know there's a few Blazor developers in the room. And if you do find the template valuable or you enjoyed my talk, please give the template a star on GitHub. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you, Jason. Do we have any more questions for Jason? Always.
Are you using Fear code with ligatures on your console there?
You know what? I have no idea. I'm using Oh My Posh, and I'm using some folders, another extension that does the folders.
Yeah.
I can't remember what it's called though. Whenever I want to configure my terminal, I either look up one of Scott Hanselman's videos, or I go to Learn. They've actually got, Microsoft Learn has some documentation on how to configure your developer console now. So, yeah. What's that?
You need a prompt repo and GitHub.
Yeah, okay, cool. I saw some cool stuff recently where they're also applying special effects or filters to your prompt, so you can make it look like it's running on a CRT screen as a Commodore 64 with scan lines and everything. So that's next level. I didn't do that tonight, but maybe next time. Cool. Any other questions?
Slightly left field question.
Yes.
So you've got a Git repo, right? So you can keep track of what's changed.
Yes.
When you're on AZD and Net,
Yes.
again, over the top of your existing project, like with a new version of AZD and Net comes out or something, to try and pick up the new stuff.
Yeah.
Is that a technique you could use, or is that a way, like, it's sort of like once
Yeah.
you run AZD and Net once and customize it, you just don't touch it after that? Or?
Yeah, that's a good question. So if you've got an existing project that you've made AZD compatible and a new version of AZD comes out, and probably more specifically, a new version of the template comes out that you built your application on, do you run AZD init again and overwrite what you've done to get the latest changes? And I think that that's a really good question. I think that you could, right? If you've got a clean working tree and you run AZD init and ask it to overwrite over the top, then you can see those changes. Obviously, you're not going to accept changes to things like main.bicep, or maybe partially for the things that they've brought in that might be useful to you, but you might see a whole bunch of new, say, bicep or Terraform modules come in. But as far as AZD, it changing versions, that sort of thing, that's going to affect your CI/CD pipeline and your local development environment. So that's something that you just install and test, and it's kind of a little bit independent of the project, unless they change the conventions, which would be something that could possibly happen, but I assume there'd be some backwards compatibility. Yes.
When you did the init originally, you pulled down a whole bunch of modules and so on, and you had lots of options of what you could use.
Yes.
Does your template we just created tonight include all those modules?
Yes. Yes. So the question was, when we did the original AZD init, we chose a template and it brought down a whole bunch of modules and other things that we could use with our application. And does my template now include those modules? And the answer is yes, it includes the same modules. And so depending on what I was trying to build, if I was building an AZD template, I might want to keep those. But if it was just a normal run-of-the-mill enterprise application that I'm building, I'm probably going to trim that down to just exactly what I need. Good question. Yes?
I was about to ask, but you kind of answered it. So the templates aren't parameterized at all? Like when you initialize a template, you don't get a choice and say, I want GitHub actions instead of DevOps actions. It just gives you everything and then it's up to you to edit the files afterwards?
Yeah, no, I don't think, so the question was, are the templates parameterized? Are there any options that you can specify when you initialize with the template? No, I don't think they are. I would like it if there was, because I have a template that can spit out an Angular application, a React application, and a web API. And if I could make that AZD compatible, but then use some parameters to say we want Angular, React, or web API, that would be really useful to me. But I haven't seen that functionality yet. Todd?
Sorry to keep asking questions.
No, love it.
I guess that's why you're here though.
Yep.
How does it go about using your Git repo as a template? So you obviously got all of
Yes.
the conventions that you talked about, right?
Yes.
So the CLI must read the file system structure and then kind of like be smart enough to know which bits of it to kind of pinch out and which bits to ignore, or is it just take the whole thing and drop it in? Like it's got to have some smarts in there somehow.
Yeah, so the question was, how does the Azure Developer CLI use the template that we just built? Does it have some smarts in there to take out just the bits it needs, or does it bring it all down? And the answer is it brings it all down.
Okay.
So yeah, the template doesn't have kind of any optional functionality to bring down part of it. It just brings the lot down.
So it just takes the whole thing from your repo and
Yeah.
slaps it in.
Yeah. So when we ran AZD init, Jason Taylor Dev, AZD Blazor demo, it was bringing down all of the Blazor web app, all of the infrastructure as code, pipelines as code, that sort of thing. And we would want to, one of the extensions that I could make to that template is to also add support for Terraform, or at least have an option where Terraform is supported.
Right. So that's why you end up with everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's just pretty
Yeah.
cool.
That's it, yeah. They're kind of like blueprints, right? They're skeleton solutions for you to get your project up and running quickly and following best practices. Yeah.
If I build a template on a template, is there any link back to it, or is it up to me to sort of roll mine forward when the downstream changes?
So the question is, if you build a template on a template, so you fork an existing template on GitHub?
You pulled down a template, made an app, and then pushed it up as a template.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So if that original one that you started with were to
Yeah. Yeah.
do you like they're independent templates
Yes.
now in the world?
Yes, they are. So they are independent templates, and if you wanted to upgrade, then it'd be the same example I used before, where you would just run AZD init over the top and see the changes and see which ones you wanted to bring into your template. Yeah, and that's kind of a bit of a common solution, even with, say, like the ASP.NET Core templates, which are not AZD related. Sometimes you just want to see what's changed, and the best way is to create a template using the old version, and then over the top create a new one using the new version. Yeah, Todd,
Sorry,
it's all good.
Time. What's the easiest way for folks to get a free Azure subscription? So, because obviously you need some kind of Azure
Yeah.
subscription to make this happen.
Yes.
If people want to play with it tonight or on the weekend, is it just sign up for some kind of free trial of Azure or something so you can run this stuff and
It is, yeah.
One bit, I guess, is how hard is it to get it? It's easier to get this than it is to get an Azure subscription, pretty much, right?
That's it. So I think in notes here. Maybe if I go to most of the templates have a little bit of information on that. So the costing of provisioning and deploying Azure resources, there's costs. So no, there's no link to the free Azure subscription. But yeah, essentially you'd be looking at getting a trial. JK?
Usually if you go my.visualstudio.com,
Yeah.
you have those benefits.
Mm-hmm.
You get like a year of a bunch of like generous stuff for a whole year, right? And then it drops you to like you get all the free tier after a year or something.
Yeah.
Or correctly.
I'll go to visualstudio.com.
I think it's important. Don't want people to stumble at the point where they can't make it work because they don't have an Azure sub or access to an Azure sub.
Well, like a template that spins up, 15 register servers and a bunch of other
Yeah.
stuff, bankruptcy overnight.
Yeah, it's still right.
Yeah, I think through visualstudio.com you can get that subscription. Do you remember what it's called? It's like Visual Studio Essentials, or is that right?
It was Dev Essentials, but I thought they dropped that subscription.
Okay.
They have free stuff now anyway.
Okay.
You say buy a subscription, it'll give you the option.
Yeah.
There's definitely a super generous free Azure
Click on
tier.
business at the top there,
Business.
and it basically says here you get like a, there was one I was like, when I did use subscription in Azure, it said,
Yeah.
Yeah.
it gives you the option in the Azure.
Mm.
And then you just pair it up with the CLI and the VS Code or Visual Studio Community and you're off and racing.
Yeah, stuff for Velcro.
Yeah.
You get a fair bit, but then you start pushing your resources for free.
Yeah, I think what they changed is they used to have $75 a
Mhm.
month, but now they just give you $200.
For the year or for the. Okay.
I think that's what they changed.
Yeah. All right, that's a good question. I should include a slide on that. So how can we get some free Azure credits when we want to try AZD out? So thanks, Todd. All right, any final questions?
Why is it AZD, not AZD?
I don't know. Do I switch back and forth? I wouldn't be surprised. AZD, AZD, I don't know. Yeah. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Jason.
Thank you. Cheers, guys. Thanks.
Also, another very big thank you to our sponsors tonight. Telstra Purple for always letting us use this amazing space and often providing us other benefits. Another big thank you to Increment, who Jason works for. Increment tonight have generously paid for our pizzas and our drinks. So another big thank you to Increment as well.
Thanks, guys.
If anyone has any topics, we're always looking for presenters and sponsors. So if anyone has any topics they'd like to get up and present or try out a talk, we're a very welcoming group here. We can help you, like if you think you've got an idea but don't quite know how to work it, we can help you, give you some advice and sort of talk through some of that as well. Don't worry, you don't need to come across as an expert in everything like Jason does with AZD. You can, it all depends on how you shape and frame your things. I've seen talks given on about, I'm just learning this thing and this is what I've learned, right? Like you can frame it in a way that you don't have to come across an expert and you don't have to worry about hecklers and everything like that. And we can talk through that with you as well. So we're a very welcoming group. We generally don't like hecklers or anything like that. And we'll kick them out if they're giving you a tough time. So please come up and have a chat to us. You can reach us through the meetup group. Todd and I and Cam are also available through other various places. Like if you're on Brisbane Developer Slack, where there is Turtle, TNT or Todd, and Cam Smith. So reach out to us if you want to, if you think you've got a presentation. We're also always looking for sponsors. So if your company would like to sponsor, you're welcome to get up and give a little bit of talk about you if you're looking for developers or anything like that. Sponsoring a .NET user group is always a great way to come up and talk to the community and say, hey, we've got these things going on. If you're interested in joining, please come and have a chat to us. So we're always looking for sponsors as well. But otherwise, thank you everyone for coming along. Next month we've got Damien Brady coming in to talk about everything with modern development pipelines and all that sort of stuff. He tells us it's not a very structured talk, but Damien is a presenter from way back, so he's got all sorts of topics to talk about. So we welcome you to come along and ask him questions about anything GitHub or development pipeline related, and he will have some interesting story to tell you. Otherwise, we still have quite a bit of pizza left over and some drinks. Feel free to help yourself, even if you just want to take them home. What you don't take is likely to go in the bin. So please help yourself to some pizza and some drinks. Some people sometimes go over the road to the pub for a drink afterwards. You're welcome to join us if that's your thing. Otherwise, we will see you next month. Thank you.
Thanks all.